Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along tonight. And just to introduce myself again, if there's anyone here that hasn't been able to be here the last couple of nights, my name is Matthew Hunter, and I am here to present to you this seminar series looking at the real Jesus. And this is the third of our 3 nights tonight. And I hope that you really enjoy what we have to present tonight. This is really the conclusion of the journey that we've been taking. Now, just a couple of things I want to announce before we really get started. Firstly is just a reminder that we have a door prize, which is a book. And towards the end of our talk this evening, I'll be giving away this door prize. Now, you'll notice on your name badge, if you've got a name badge when you came in, that on the back that there's a number, and I'll be using just a random number generator to pick a number, random number, at the end. And so just keep a note of what number you have on the back of your badge, so that hopefully you might be lucky at the end tonight. Also, just to make you aware, we do have refreshments up the back after we finish tonight, and you're more than welcome to stay behind and to share with us in a few refreshments. There's going to be some hot and cold drinks and some biscuits and also some fruit there. And if you do have any questions tonight about anything that I have to share, I just ask that if you could maybe keep those until the end and maybe talk to me. I'll be there at the refreshments afterwards. It means we can try to keep the actual presentation compact, and that if you've got any questions you really want to ask me, I'm more than happy to talk to you for as long as you like afterwards. So just keep those things in mind. But tonight, we want to conclude our seminars and looking at who this person, Jesus, was. Now, in the last 2 nights, we've looked at the evidence for the historical Jesus. We've discovered that there is more evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ than probably any character from antiquity, and that the New Testament is actually one of the most verifiable ancient texts that we have in existence today. We found that out in the first night. Now, last night we also had a bit of a look that, seeing that this man was real and he existed, what kind of influence has he had in people's lives beyond the realm of religion? Has he really had much impact, and does he really matter? And we had a bit of a look at how he has had a direct impact upon such things such as human rights, also the development of healthcare, and also hospitals and orphanages as well. Also the increase in availability of education for all and the development of public schools. Also, we had a look at how he influenced and helped to inspire the development of also modern scientific theory, which is interesting. You wouldn't have thought it. Now, this is not to mention some of the other things that he's had an impact upon, which most people would be aware of, such as morals, the value of human life, which today we take for granted many times. And also there's been many different areas of influence in the arts and also in literature and in many different areas, and more than what I could really list last night. In fact, there was most probably about another 12 areas I could have talked about last night, but I just didn't have the time to do so. And if you are interested in where I'm getting any of the information for any of the talks for these 3 nights, I do have a flyer on the table at the back, the registration table. It just is a simple white plain piece of paper, and it just says suggested reading. And that's just basically lists a few of the books that I have drawn some of the information from to present these talks over the last 3 nights. But we basically looked and saw that if we look at all these areas of influence, that really Jesus has had a very great influence in our society and our world today, most probably more than any single individual in history. The question we're going to be dealing with tonight is probably the most important question we must ask, considering the information we've looked at the last 2 nights. And that is, who did Jesus claim himself that he was? Who did he actually say that he was? Was he a moral and philosophical genius like no one we have ever seen before? Was he just a man who was caught up in events beyond his control? Was he even an absolute nutcase caught up in self-delusional self-aggrandizement? Or did he actually claim to be God and intend to change the very nature of the world and its future by his presence. And there's been many, many people throughout history that have made many claims about who this man was. Some people claim that he was a revolutionary, they almost on the same scale as Che Guevara. Some people say and suggest that even he was maybe a political genius. Others make wild claims like he was a Rastafarian pot-smoking holy man. There's some people who say that all he was a Jewish rabbi and that's all. Some people say that, look, he was just a great moral teacher and maybe even a prophet. But there are some, and in fact the majority of people who follow him today, who claim that he is actually God. And this is quite a radical claim to make. There's so many different opinions on him. I mean, today we even have people trying to attach him to a particular political arm. Some people say that Jesus is a socialist. They look at the things he did and he said, and that's definitely the box he fits in. And then some people will say, well, maybe he was a Democrat, in the American political scene. Maybe, what would he have been? Would he have been a Democrat or would he have been a Republican? Which one would have he been? Who knows? I like this one. Jesus didn't ride an elephant. And that's how they decide what he would have been. I mean, come on. That's taking it a bit far. But anyway, we have so many different ways we try to mould him and put him into some sort of box. It seems like everyone wants to take this man and mould him into a person they want him to be. Some people just say he was a religious lunatic. Now, I had to find a way to put this picture in tonight because I love it. Isn't that crazy? This is apparently a Santa run in the States that they do every year, and he got dressed up as Jesus and put a cross on his back. But anyway, some people say he was just a religious lunatic. But how do we possibly wade through all the varying views of this man to determine who he really was? And can we really at all? How can we find out who he really was? Well, the best place we can really start is to look in the New Testament, as we found, which is most probably the best document that records his life and gives us some sort of idea of who he was. And to actually ask ourselves the question, who did he actually say he was? What did he actually say about himself? Many people make so many different varying claims, but what did he really say? It's worth noting first, before we look at this material, that there are some who claim that there are some equally valid but different accounts of Jesus' life. Now, these are often called the Gnostic Gospels. I don't know if anyone here has heard of the Gnostic Gospels. There are literally hundreds of these. Some of them are dated, pretty late, a long time after Jesus was alive. But some of them are actually pretty early and fairly closely written to Jesus' life. And if we apply the same tests that we applied to the New Testament on these same documents, we've got to have a look to see whether they hold up to the same sort of scrutiny that the New Testament does. When we have a look at it, the reality is that there are very few of these documents in existence. We looked at the number of copies that there are of the New Testament, and remember we found that there's over 5,500 copies in just the Greek alone of the New Testament. Whereas any other ancient document, the next closest was Homer's The Iliad, which is about 640 copies of that in existence. When we look at these Gnostic Gospels, how many of these do we find in existence? And when were they written, and when do we have the earliest copies? Well, this is the earliest Gnostic Gospel we really know of, and most probably the most famous, the Gospel of Thomas. And we know that it was written sort of around 140 AD. That's what the consensus basically is. But the earliest copy we have is about 340 AD. I mean, that's not too bad. That's about maybe 200 years. But we don't have a complete copy of it. There are only 4 copies left in existence. Original copies left in existence. And none of them have the complete text. And they are all slightly different as well. When we look at all the Gnostic Gospels, they all fit into this category. There's very few of them around. And when we have a look at them, really, they don't hold up to the same sort of scrutiny that the New Testament does. The other thing is that some people believe conspiracy theories that these Gospels were actually suppressed by the church at a later date. in favour of what we have now in the New Testament. But there's absolutely no evidence that at any time these texts, these Gnostic Gospels, held any significant influence in the life of the church, or that they were ever included as a part of the New Testament by any great portion of the church. The other thing as well, when we have a look at the early Christian historians, none of them ever quote any of the Gnostic Gospels. They constantly quote the rest of the New Testament, make hundreds and hundreds of references, but not one single quote from any of these. So why would we hold these up and say that they have any more validity than the New Testament? We really need to go to the New Testament if we want to know what Jesus did and didn't say. You know, one of the most popular claims about Jesus today is that he never claimed to be God. Have you heard that? So many people say he never actually claimed to be God. They say that this belief was created about 300 years after Jesus' life, the end of his life. But you know what? We've already seen in what we've looked at during our seminars that there were people not long after Jesus died who were claiming that he said he was God. And in fact, some of these people weren't even Christians. There was Pliny, the younger, who only 80 years after Jesus' life said that Christians at that time were worshipping this man as if he were a god. We have so many people claiming that he was. Now, how could the idea that he was God have been created 300 years after the end of his life if Pliny said that only 80 years afterwards? And that's the thing that he had to say about all Christians that he'd had any experience with. So let's have a look tonight at what he did and didn't say about himself. Firstly, did Jesus in fact come out quite clearly and say in just a categorical statement that he was God? To answer this simply, we never see it written anywhere that he comes out and he says, "Hello everyone, I just want to tell you that I am God." We never see a clear, direct statement like that. But would we expect him to do that? Would we expect anyone to do that? Is that something that someone who is maybe sane would do? And also, some people say that this was put into the New Testament by the Bible writers afterwards. Now, you think that if they were going to put that into the New Testament, don't you think that they might try to make it plain and clear and have some quotation where he just clearly says, "I'm God"? Wouldn't that make sense that they would do that if they're just going to insert it in there? But we don't actually see that anywhere. So, do we expect people to really go around being quoted as saying things like that? "I am God." Now, do you expect every time the new Pope addresses the crowd that he would come along and he'd say, "Guess what everyone, I'm the Pope"? And every time he goes up to someone and he introduces himself to someone, "G'day, my name is the Pope. I'm the Pope. Did you know I'm the Pope? By the way, I'm the..." You know, we don't go around talking like this with each other, do we? Because how would you know whether the Pope was the Pope? Well, you'd expect the Pope to act like the Pope and to say things that only the Pope would say. You don't expect him to be going around saying it clearly like that all the time, otherwise you'd think there'd be something wrong with you. If God decided to become human, do you think he would go around saying it all the time? In fact, if he wanted to develop relationships with people who and want to get to know people around him, the last thing you most probably would want to do is go around and say, "Guess what everyone, by the way, I'm actually God." What are people going to do? They're going to go, "Nutcase, I'll go in this direction." If God decided to become a human being, don't you think that he would try to maybe not say that directly? Maybe, and this is maybe just a far out idea, maybe it's just possible that if God did become a human being and he came down, that he might actually try to avoid saying that he was God and actually act like God and let people figure it out. Maybe. Maybe that's just a wild idea. I don't know. But if we have a look at it, what did he say about himself and what didn't he? So if he didn't come straight out and say it, what things did he say that we would expect only God to say? You know, if he wasn't going to come out and say it directly, what sort of things would we expect God to say if he was a human being? Well, firstly, let's understand a claim that he did make about himself. This claim was that he was Israel's Messiah. Now, if anyone understands what this really means, the Israelites had been waiting for a very long time for this Messiah. They'd had a firm belief that there was a Messiah coming. And at the time that Jesus came, there was a lot of different people who'd actually claimed to be the Messiah as well. But they believed that the Messiah was going to deliver them from the Romans. They had all these ideas of what the Messiah was going to do for them. But one claim we know from the Bible that he did claim is that he did claim to be Israel's Messiah. You see, we see in the Gospel of Matthew, he is recorded as asking his disciples, who did people say he was? And they answer by saying, well, some people are calling you a prophet, some people are calling you John the Baptist, others are calling you Elijah, and others are calling you Jeremiah. And then he asks them this question, who do you say I am? And it's interesting because the Apostle Peter responds to him and declares this. He says, you are the Christ, which is the Greek form of the word Messiah. So it's the same word, just in a different language. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, if Jesus didn't believe that about himself, what would you expect him to say at this point? Now, hang on a second, Peter, that's just wrong, that's bogus. Wouldn't you? He'd correct it. If he was a decent man, he'd correct that mistake. But he doesn't do that at all. In fact, we see that Jesus then commends Peter for saying this. And he actually tells Peter that it was God who had revealed this to him, and he calls Peter blessed. Jesus agrees with him and accepts this idea that he's actually the Messiah or the Christ. But what other things did he claim? What other things did he say about himself? Well, there's a very interesting story in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus makes a claim that no one had ever been recorded to make this claim before in the entire history of the Bible or the Jewish nation. The story tells of some friends bringing a man who is paralysed to Jesus. He was in a house talking to people, and the house was so full that the crowd was spilling out beyond the house, and they couldn't get inside. And houses back then had flat roofs. They actually sometimes grew grass on the roofs and put their animals on the top. And they had stairways up the top. And so it says that they came up and they couldn't get this man to Jesus, so they decided to dig a hole in the roof. They got up on the roof, they dug a hole, and they lowered this man down right in front of Jesus. And when Jesus sees this man lowered down in front of him, he has compassion towards this man. They obviously thought Jesus was pretty special to go to all that effort to get this man to Jesus. They thought that Jesus could probably do something for him. But what's amazing is the conversation that happens next. And let me read this for you, as it's recorded in the New Testament. It says, and Jesus, seeing their faith, said to the paralytic, son, your sins are forgiven. Son, your sins are forgiven. This was a pretty big claim. But notice what people around him think when he says this. But some of the scribes sitting there were reasoning in their hearts, and they said, why does this man speak that way? He's blaspheming. Does anyone know what the word blaspheme means? To blaspheme means to claim to be God. To claim to be God. And this was actually something for the Jews that was so serious that in the Old Testament was actually punishable by death. So they're saying in their hearts that he's blaspheming. And they say to themselves, who can forgive sins but who? God alone. Immediately Jesus, aware in his spirit that they were reasoning that way within themselves, said to them, why are you reasoning about these things in your heart? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up, pick up your pallet and walk? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, I say to you, get up, pick up your pallet and go home. And he got up and immediately picked up the pallet and went out in the sight of everyone. So they were all amazed and glorifying God, saying, we've never seen anything like this. Now the thing was, he says, what's easier to say? Your sins are forgiven you, or pick up your pallet and walk. Now the thing is, when we think about that, to heal a paralytic man and have them just completely healed instantly and pick up his pallet and go, that's something only God can do. And they were saying that forgiving sins was something that only God could do. He was saying, Now hang on a second, both of these things are things that only God can do. So, by logic, if I am God and I'm saying I can forgive sins, I should also be able to say I can also heal you. And he says, pick up your pallet. And so they start going, hang on, he's doing things that only God says that he can do. Notice what he claims here. He claims he has the authority and ability to forgive sins. And remember, to a Jew, sins was the breaking of God's laws, or the Ten Commandments. Now this was something that the religious leaders present recognised was something that only God could do, and it was blasphemous to claim this. He claims to have this authority in himself. Now what else does he say in other passages that makes us believe that he thought that he was something other than just a human being? Now, he also said to his disciples, his 70 disciples, after he'd sent them out to do ministry, and they came back and they were glorifying because they'd had some pretty amazing things happen. And notice what he says here in Luke chapter 10. It says that the 70 returned with joy, saying, "The Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." And he says to them, "I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning." And he goes on and he talks about, don't glory that the demons are subject to you, but glory that your names are in heaven. But notice what he says. I was watching, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Now the Bible tells us that the time that Satan fell from heaven was before Adam and Eve ate the fruit, because there was Satan tempting them in the garden. This is what the Bible claims. So this is Jesus himself saying, I existed even before that happened. Now that's a long time before the day that Jesus was sitting there. A long time beforehand. And the thing is that he's only 30 years old. How can he claim that he saw this event if he's only 30 years old? Now there's some people who might try to explain this away, but look at what he also claims in John chapter 3. He also says, "No one has ascended into heaven, but he who descended from heaven is the Son of Man, the Son of Man." Now this is a term he used for himself all the time. In fact, he uses this term most probably more commonly than any other term when referring to himself, the Son of Man. He's actually claiming here that he didn't arrive as a person. He didn't start existing when he became a human being and was born, but he actually existed in heaven previously. Now the next passage is where Jesus claims to have been in existence a long time before his earthly life here. And in fact, a long time even before Abraham, who is the father of Israel. This was 2,000 years before Jesus lived. Notice what he has to say here when he was talking to some people in the temple. He says, Jesus answered, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God, and you have not come to know him, but I know him. And if I say that I do know him, I will be a liar like you. That I do not know him, I'll be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad." So the Jews said to him, "You are not 50 years old, and you are saying you've seen Abraham." They're very clearly saying to him, "Are you claiming that you were actually in existence before Abraham, or even in Abraham's day, 2,000 years ago? But you're not even 50 years old. How can you be claiming this?" Now, if Jesus was misunderstood at this point in time, he would correct them. But what does he say? He says to them, "Truly, truly," which is a very strong statement, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born," he uses this word, "I am." We're going to come to a very significant part now. Because this word that he uses for "I am," to us it's pretty unremarkable. If I was to say, "I am a teacher," you go, "What do you do?" Yep, of course you are. We use that phrase all the time. But there's something happening here in the language we've got to understand in the Greek, in the background. And I'm going to explain that a little bit to you. This leads us to our next point about what Jesus did and didn't claim about himself. Jesus, a number of times in the New Testament, uses this term, "I am." And this seems very normal to us. But we've got to go back, right back to when Moses saw the burning bush at Mount Sinai. And he came before the presence of the Lord, and God asked him to take his shoes off because he was on holy ground. And during this conversation, Moses asks God, he says, "Tell me your name so that I can tell the others who has sent me. Tell me what your name is." And God answers to him and says this, "I am who I am." Now that's a really interesting name to give. It's kind of like saying, it's like giving a name without giving a name, isn't it? It's like, I just am who I am. If you want a name, that can be my name. I just am. That's who I am. I am who I am. It's a very kind of interesting way of looking at it. But in the Hebrew, this is how it would be written out in the Hebrew. The top line is the most ancient Hebrew writing we know of. The next line is the next one, and then the bottom line is modern Hebrew writing. It's changed over the years. But this is how it was written out. And basically in the English it was the letters YHWH. Now the interesting thing about this is we've got no idea how this word is pronounced, because the ancient Jews saw this name as so holy that you would never say it. It was never to be spoken, and in fact when they wrote it and copied it in their scriptures, every time they came to that name and they had to write it out, they had to wash their hands after writing it because it was so holy. Because of this, they actually didn't have vowels like we have. You can see it was just YHWH. But they didn't put vowels in their words because they just knew how to pronounce them. It's kind of like, I don't know if anyone has been to any of the Slavic countries here. Have you ever been to any Slavic countries? Anyone here? Or seen any Slavic words? Sometimes in especially Polish, I mean Polish is one of the worst languages. I've got a lot of Polish friends. Sorry Leo, I know that you're Polish too. But they don't use a lot of vowels. And in fact there's words where you'll barely see a vowel, and the only way you can pronounce it is if you know what the vowel sound is attached to some of those consonants. This is what it was like in ancient Hebrew. They didn't put the vowel sounds in. You just had to know how to pronounce it. But because they never pronounced the name, it was never said right down to our time, and we've got no idea how they said it. So modern scholars today guess, the best guess that they have is that they pronounced this name Yahweh. But we really don't know how they said it. But this is the name that God gave to himself, and it was the name that defined him throughout the rest of the Jews' history, and even to this day. So what does this have to do with Jesus saying, "I am"? Now you notice what's a part of this name. I am who I am. Well, the thing that was interesting was that the New Testament was written in Greek. So it's very hard to compare the words in the New Testament to the Old Testament. The Old Testament's written in Hebrew, the New Testament is written in Greek. How do we compare this? Well, it's quite wonderful really, because 200 years before Jesus was born, there was a group of 70 Jewish scholars who decided to translate the Old Testament into guess what language? Greek. And they translated the Old Testament into Greek. And you know what? Guess which part they found hardest to translate? When they come to Yahweh. How do you translate a word that is so holy that you can't even speak it? How do you use another language and translate it? Well, they tried to do the best they could. And this is how they translated it. They translated "I am who I am" as ego eimi. Now, not everywhere where you see "I am" in the New Testament is it ego eimi. It's only in a few places, because that was what they used in their translation of the Old Testament for God's name. Now, the interesting thing is when Jesus says to them, before Abraham was, he says ego eimi. He uses God's name. But the other thing was, to make it even more complicated, you see the New Testament was written in Greek, but guess what language Jesus spoke? He spoke Aramaic, which was a form of Hebrew. So he was actually speaking Aramaic or Hebrew, and they translated it into Greek. So when he spoke it, he wouldn't have said ego eimi. That's the thing. It was just recorded that way. So what would have he said? He would have actually stood there. This was absolutely astonishing for anyone to do. He says to the Jews, before Abraham was, Yahweh. No one ever speaks his name. Now, How do we know that he really did speak this word? If someone was to use the name of God and apply it to themselves, what would you expect as a reaction from the Jews who saw that as a blasphemy, punishable by death? What would you expect those hearing that to have done when they heard him claim, before Abraham was, I am God? That's basically what he says. He uses God's name for himself. What would you expect him to do? They'd try to kill him, don't you think? Well, that would be just absolutely the worst thing he could do. What do they do? Let's have a look what they actually do. It says, therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. Now the interesting thing to note is he wasn't speaking to his enemies at this point in time. He was actually speaking to those who said that they were following him. So these aren't people who are already offside with him who wanted to get him. These were people who believed in him, that suddenly were so incensed by the word that he used, they wanted to kill him. It was a pretty significant event to happen. Now we've got to ask ourselves though, did he use this any other time? Did he actually say this any other times throughout the New Testament? We know that it's recorded at least another 8 times when he used this phrase, ego eimi, or Yahweh, I am. And these are the ones where it's recorded. John 11:25, Jesus said to her, Yahweh, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. John 6:35. John said to them, Yahweh, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. John 8:12. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, Yahweh, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. John 10:7. Then so Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, Yahweh, I am the door of the sheep. John 10:11. Yahweh, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The other thing as well is, to the Jews, the idea of a shepherd, God was their shepherd. It was a very strong idea of a symbol of God, was this shepherd. Now, John 14:6, Jesus said to him, Yahweh, I am the life, the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. I mean, it's not just him using the word Yahweh here. Do you see? That's pretty significant. Like, he's not just making a big claim in using that word. Think about everything else he's saying with it. If someone came up to you today and said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one can know God but unless he comes to me, you would tell them that they're an absolute nutter and to get lost, and I'm going over here, thank you very much. But he continually said this, and continually had people listening to him, and crowds listening to him. Listen to what he says in John 15:1. Yahweh, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. John 8:5-6. They answered him and said, Jesus Nazarene, and he said to them, Yahweh, I am he. This was when he was being arrested. And they came to him, they were asking him if he was Jesus the Nazarene, if he was the one that they were looking for. And look what he says. He says, I am he, Yahweh. And look what happens. It says Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, Yahweh, I am he, what was their reaction? They drew back and fell to the ground. It sounds like people in shock, doesn't it? They were shocked at what he said. Is there anywhere else that he claims to be God in the New Testament? Now, the thing that we've got to understand is if he claimed to be God, then we would see that reflected in how other people react to him, as we've already seen. Is there anywhere else where we see people listening to him understand that he's claiming to be God? Well, we look in John chapter 10. He says, I and the Father are one. And it says the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. And Jesus answered to them, I showed you many good works from the Father, for which of them are you stoning me? The Jews answered and said, for a good work we do not stone you, but for what? Blasphemy. What do they understand him to be saying? That he's claiming to be God. We're not killing you because you've done good works. You know, we said and done heaps of good stuff. but it's because you're claiming to be God that we're going to kill you. And they go on further. Because you, being just a man, which he was, make yourself out to be God. You're claiming to be God. Now, if someone's about to stone you because they understand that you're claiming to be God, wouldn't you go, if that wasn't what you were claiming, you'd go, no, definitely not. You misunderstand me, let me set you straight. But he doesn't. He never does. The two most important cases of when others understood what he was claiming was when he was on trial before the Jewish leaders. Now, this is when his life was at peril. This was when he knew that they were wanting to kill him. And he was in trial. And notice what it says in Luke chapter 22. When it was day, the council of elders of the people assembled, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council chamber, saying, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask a question, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man," who is referring to being himself, "will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." And they all said, "You are the Son of God then?" As a question. And he said to them, "Yes," what? Yahweh. And what did they say after that? They said, "We need no further testimony." In other words, what they're saying is he's just condemned himself to death. Why has he just condemned himself to death? Because he's used the name of God and applied it to himself. For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth. It gives us a bit more depth when we see Matthew 26. The high priest stood up and said to him, Do you not answer? He wasn't answering any of their questions. What then? What is it that these men are testifying against you? But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God to tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you after that you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." And what does the high priest do? He tears his robes and says, "He has blasphemed. What further do we need witnesses?" In other words, he's just condemned himself with his own mouth. We don't need witnesses anymore. But you know, the interesting thing, it was actually blasphemy for the high priest to tear his robes. So he commits blasphemy and then accuses Jesus of blasphemy. It's an interesting turn of events. This is not all the times that he actually makes these claims. I couldn't go into all of them tonight. The other point that many people have made when we look at Jesus' life that gives us a bit of an idea whether he claimed to be God or not is whether or not he accepted the worship of others. You see, to a Jew, nothing created can accept the worship of others. The only thing that can accept worship is who? God and God alone. And we see this example in a couple of instances, and I can't go through all the instances which set this precedent, but one precedent is in Acts chapter 10. And here Peter the Apostle is talking to Cornelius. It says, when Peter entered, Cornelius, this Roman man, met him and fell at his feet and worshipped him. But how does Peter respond? Peter raised him up and said, "Stand up, I'm just a man. Don't worship me, I'm a man. If I'm just a man, you can't worship me, you can only worship God alone." It's the kind of idea that behind this. We also see this in Revelation 22. The Apostle John is having visions and he's seeing these angels, and one of these angels is in front of him, and it says in Revelation 22, "I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things, and when I heard and saw, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed me these things." How does the angel, like this is an angel of heaven. If anyone deserves worship, maybe an angel does. How does he respond? "The angel who showed me these things, but he said to me, 'Do not do that.'" What does he say? "Do not do that, for I am a fellow servant of yours and of the brethren, the prophets, and those who heed the words of this book." What does he say? Worship God. The only person you can worship is God. To a Jew, the only person who could accept worship was God. And we've got to ask ourselves, is there anywhere in the New Testament where Jesus accepts the worship of others? I'm just going to show you a few verses. I can't show you all of them today. Let's have a look at these ones. Matthew 8:2. "And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.'" Does Jesus respond and say, "Don't worship me, I'm just a man"? No, he doesn't. He never corrects him. We also see in Matthew 14 and verse 33, "And those who were in the boat," these are his disciples, it's saying, "You are certainly God's son." What do? They worshipped him. Those who were in the boat worshipped him. Jesus doesn't say, "Don't do that. You're my disciples. I'm teaching you the right way. Don't worship me. That's not the right thing to do." He doesn't. And also John 9:38, he said, this was a man who Jesus had been brought, this young man who had an evil spirit before him. And the evil spirit, no one could cast this evil spirit out. They asked Jesus to do it. And he asked the Father, "Do you believe I can do it?" And he says, "I believe, but help my unbelief." And he says, "I believe." And what happens? He worshipped him. "Lord, I believe." And what? He worshipped him. Okay, the next one. Hebrews 1 verse 6. This is later in the New Testament. And this is the writer of Hebrews saying that, "And when he again brings the firstborn into the world," he says, "and let all the angels of God worship him." This whole passage is talking about Jesus. What is God instructing the angels in heaven to do to Jesus? To worship him. Now that's not even looking into Revelation. If you go into Revelation, there are texts after texts after texts where Jesus is being worshipped by everyone. Only God can be worshipped. It's so clear. If Jesus was just a man, even a very good man representing God, well, you know what? That's what the disciples were. They were good men representing God. Some people might question whether they were good men. I don't know. But the thing was that they were representing God, but they weren't worshipped. Only God can be worshipped. It's very clear in the Bible that a Jew only believed God could be worshipped. Well, how do we see that the disciples then, what did they think of Jesus? After Jesus had gone away, what did they think? How did they talk about Jesus? Did they claim that he was God? Did they confirm that Jesus believed and taught that he was God? Well, the earliest example we see of this, of the disciples, is when Thomas sees Jesus after the resurrection. And he doesn't believe the accounts that the others have seen Jesus. You see, Jesus has appeared to all of the others and he goes, "I don't agree. I don't think that he's been raised from the dead. I won't believe it until I see the scars in his hands and in his side." And then suddenly Jesus appears and he sees those scars. And this is the response of Thomas when he sees the scars on Jesus' hands and in his side. He says, "Thomas answered and said to him, 'What? My Lord and what?
My God.'"
My God. He clearly understands Jesus to be more than just a mere human being. What about the Apostle Paul? Now, I could spend all night talking about what Paul said about Jesus and what Paul claimed about Jesus, but one passage which most probably sums it up the best is in Philippians. He says this, he says, "Have this attitude in yourselves which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men." Now this word form is really interesting. If you understand what that word means in the original language, it means something that reflects or manifests fully and truly the essence of what something is. It means it is the very same as that thing. He's saying here that Jesus, although he is God, decided that it doesn't matter and he would cast that aside and become human for a time. And there's so many more passages where Paul claims directly that Jesus claimed to be God. There's nowhere where the disciples correct any belief and say that, well, hang on a second, Jesus isn't God. You'd think if that was getting around that they might have said that, but they only do the opposite. We even think about the numerous names that Jesus has applied to himself in the New Testament. Jesus was described as the Messiah, but there were names that were attached to who the Messiah was. And I want you to watch this little video quickly.
Isaiah 9:6 says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of peace. His name shall be called Emmanuel, God with us, the root and offspring of David, the Lamb of God, the Good Shepherd, the arm of the Lord, the Rock of Ages, the cornerstone, the author and finisher of our faith. His name shall be called the first and the last, the beginning and the ending, the Alpha and the Omega, the Creator, the great I am, the Holy One, the way, the truth, and the life, the Redeemer, the Savior, my Lord and my God, Lord of glory, Lord of lords, King of kings, the Almighty God. His name is Jesus Christ.
When he claimed to be the Messiah, he took on all these names. He took on all these names upon himself, and so many more than just that. Now you think about some of those names that he took on. The Everlasting Father. That kind of sounds like claiming to be God. Now the other thing is, if some of us are maybe given a title, sometimes we get given a title. We might get a title of MVP in our football team, for example. Now if you're given the title of Most Valuable Player, the next time you step out onto that football ground, what do you feel? You feel good, but you also start to feel a bit of pressure on your shoulders, don't you? Because I've just been called the most valuable player. So if I don't live up to being the most valuable player, then there's going to be some questions to be answered after the game, isn't there? Well, think about all of these. For Jesus to accept the title Messiah meant to accept all of these names upon his shoulder, and if you don't live up to it, who on earth would want all of those titles? Who on earth would actually want to be associated with any of those titles? In fact, Jesus has more titles and names associated with him than any other person in the Bible, by far. One more important point is that Jesus not only claimed these things, but that he claimed he would actually come back to life again, provide a means of salvation for people and their alienation from God, and that he would go back to heaven and one day come back to earth to collect his followers. He says this most clearly in John chapter 14. He says, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For if I go to prepare a place for you, I go to prepare a place for you. I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you will be also." This is an outrageous claim. And it's so prominent in the teachings of the New Testament that the most prominent teaching throughout the whole New Testament is that Jesus would come back again. It's actually the most prominent of all the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament, and it's actually quoted as being mentioned over 60 times throughout the New Testament. Jesus really, when we look at it, left absolutely no room as to who he was claiming to be, other than actually standing up in front of everyone and saying, "Guess what? I'm God." He left no room as to who he understood that he was claiming for himself to be. He was claiming that he was God come into human flesh, that he lived a perfect life to provide the only way to know God. He even makes a more astounding claim, and this is offensive to most people. Listen to what he says. He says, "He who rejects me rejects the one who sent me." He actually says, if you reject him, you're rejecting God. That's a huge claim to make. What else? He says to the people he's talking to at this stage, "You are of this world, I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins. If you do not believe that I am the one I claim to be," notice what he's saying. If you don't believe who I'm claiming to be, you will indeed die in your sins. He's saying you won't get to know God. You will be cut off from him. If you don't believe what my claims are, who did he claim to be? He claimed to be God. There was even another statement he made which was amazing. He said, talking to the religious leaders of Israel, he said, "You guys search the scriptures." These guys were experts in the scriptures. They knew it back to front. They could quote entire books from memory. And they said, "You search the scriptures because you think in them you have eternal life, He says, it's these that talk about me. He's actually saying the entire Bible, the entire Old Testament, in fact, the whole point of it is to point to me. Now, what person in their right mind would ever make a claim like that? Would a person in their right mind make a claim like that? You'd have to wonder that, wouldn't you? This isn't even to mention the over 300 specific prophecies from the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled. Now, I have a handout here. I don't have the time to go through that either. But I've got a handout here. I've got only 5 copies, up the back, that list and detail prophecies from the Old Testament. Actually, 351 prophecies from the Old Testament that Jesus directly fulfilled. And go and check it out for yourself. Don't believe me or believe anyone else who compiled this, but go and check it for yourself and see whether you reckon it's correct. They're up the back. Feel free to grab one after tonight. The reality is that this leaves us with one of only 2 choices. If Jesus claims that he was God, well, there's only 2 ways for that to go. One was that those claims were false. The other is that those claims were true. Now, if those claims were false, then there's 2 options to this. He either knew that he was making bogus claims. If he knew he was making bogus claims, what does that say about this man? It either means he was making a deliberate misrepresentation of the truth, or it means he was just plainly a liar, or he was a hypocrite, or even worse, a demon, a horrible person, because who would claim this? But the other thing was, remember, he knew what he was dying for. He knew he was dying because he was being called a blasphemer, because he was claiming to be God. And if he knew it was incorrect, what an idiot. To claim to die for something you know is not correct. Why would you do that? The other option is that he didn't know that that was incorrect. He honestly believed he was God, but he wasn't. That's the other option we have there, and well, that really only leads us to him being deluded and a lunatic. But the other option is that these claims were true. And that only leads us to one point, and that is that he was God who came down as a human being. And that gives us 2 alternatives. We either believe that or we don't. We accept it or we don't. I want you to consider this tonight. I don't want you to believe it because any of the information we've presented over the last few nights, but I want you to look into it for yourself. Hopefully we've given you a few tools over these nights to look into this information. But if Jesus was God, was who he claimed to be, and if his followers believed him to be God in human flesh and taught others this also, and if this was a ridiculous, bogus claim, why would anyone bother to try to disprove this? You know, if this was just a bogus, totally ridiculous idea that he's claiming to be God, why would someone bother to try to disprove this? Now, I'm standing before you tonight. If I was to tell you that I am not Matthew Hunter, I'm not a human being, I'm actually an onion. Okay, and I can come up with lots of different arguments to convince you that I'm actually not a human being, I'm an onion. And I can come up with the most fantastic ideas, and give you all these roundabout arguments and everything else. I'm an onion, and you start to think, yes, you're an onion. I mean, would anyone really walk out of here tonight and think, yeah, he's an onion? I wonder how he tastes. Like, when we put him in a roast? No one's going to walk out of here tonight thinking that. Well, why? I mean, the thing was, what are you going to do? You're going to laugh at me like you just had. You're going to walk out of here, and at worst, you're going to mock me to other people, saying, that guy reckons he's an onion. Aren't you? I can tell you one thing, there's not going to be people in 2,000 years from now writing books and arguing about whether I was an onion or not. Are there? That's definitely not going to be the result of tonight. Because if you make a claim that's ridiculous, it doesn't warrant that kind of response, does it? This claim that I'm an onion is just as ridiculous as me claiming that I'm God. To claim, for a human being to claim to be God is absolutely preposterous and ridiculous on the extreme level. Absolutely. I'll agree with that 100%. So why would there bother to be people 2,000 years later still discussing whether this man was who he claimed to be? That he was God or not? Is it due to the disciples who followed him just being, absolutely brilliant at creating the most elaborate hoax in history? I mean, these poor, uneducated fishermen managed to create the best hoax in history? Really? Or could it maybe just be true that this man's claims were true and that they're still argued today because they're true? It's an interesting idea. So in conclusion, as we've discovered that Jesus was a real person in history, the biblical account of him is one of the most reliable historical documents in existence. If Jesus was the most influential person in history, recognised by non-Christian historians as such, based on just a teaching ministry, remember, of only 3 years. I mean, look at the other influential teachers through history. How long did they teach for? 30, 40 years. He only taught for 3. He never wrote a single word down. Entirety of history is split around this person. In the Western world, at least, what do we count our years by? Well, they're trying to remove that reference now by saying BC and, BCE and ACE? That's right. I think it's ACE and BCE, isn't it? Anyway, I can't remember. But all of history is counted from his birth. Really? Are we going to count history from the birth of a lunatic? Is that really going to happen? What about all the Old Testament prophecies that were fulfilled, that were highly improbable that they would have been fulfilled? What if all these statements are true? Where does it leave us regarding this man? Well, Josh McDowell says this. He's quoting Mark Twain. He says, "A person who takes the Bible seriously rather than tries to explain it away may agree with Mark Twain when he said that it was not the part of the Bible that he did not understand that bothered him the most, but the parts that he did understand." But think about this man, Jesus, who claimed to be God. He says that he also being God, that he's able to restore our lives to the way they were meant to be originally. He says that's why he came, to show us that he's able to do this for us. How many of us, when faced with the promise of a life full of internal peace, of joy, love, goodness, kindness, gentleness, clarity of mind, and all other manner of good things that he claims that he wants to give to us, would say to ourselves, "No thanks, I don't want any of that"? Well, these are the very things that Jesus actually claims to give to a person when they choose to follow him and have a relationship with him. The Bible goes through and explains to us how that is done. But also, the Bible doesn't just say, just accept it because a bunch of people believe it, or just accept it because it says it. The Bible actually says this. It says, "Taste and see that the Lord's good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him." Don't just take someone else's word for it. Actually test it out for yourself and see whether it's true or not. If you want to see whether this man and anything he had to say is true, the Bible's is a place to start. I want to offer you tonight an opportunity. I'm just going to ask Matthew and John just to hand out a couple of flyers. And this is just information for you, but I want to offer you an opportunity, if you want to look deeper into who this man Jesus is. We'll be running a fascinating series of a deeper series of studies looking at Jesus' life and actually looking at his life chronologically as it talks about it through the Bible. And these studies are called The Light of the World. So this is the flyer being handed out. If you would like to register for this, feel free to talk to the ladies at the desk on your way out, and you can write your name down. Or there's also a phone number on there that you can register your interest with as well. But if you're interested in looking into who this man was a bit more, feel free to come. It's only 12 sessions, and it's looking chronologically through the Bible at who this man is. And there is a cost. The cost is just $10 for the materials. But if there's someone who wants to come along and they're not able to afford the cost for materials, just talk to us and we'll sort that out as well. But some of you may not really be interested in studies. Some of you may not be interested in going and looking into those sorts of things. And you might be interested in coming along to see a video. And we'll be showing a video in a few weeks' time. This video is part of a brand new documentary series that has won over 14 international awards, which looks at the claims of Christianity as seen through the issues of our day, called the Beyond series. And these are 14 videos in the series. And we'll actually be previewing this series by showing one of these videos at the Bairnsdale Adventist Church on April 13th at 7 p.m. That's the flyer that you've got there. And this will just be a one-off, but basically we're not really interested. You can buy these DVDs if you like them, but if you don't want to buy them, you can borrow them. We've got lots of copies and we'd be more than happy to lend them out to people who'd like to see more. And I just want to show you a short clip of a preview of the video that we'll be watching to give you a bit of a taste for it.
Being trapped is one of the most scary things you'll ever experience. And whatever it is that has you trapped, debts, lifestyle, bad relationships, poor health, even life itself, whatever the circumstances, the effects are the same. Stress, worry, desperation, and despair.
We've basically lost about 70% of our capability. I'm desperately trying to keep them in here to stay alive. I'm maybe breaking down at the moment.
Now, I don't know if any of you remember the two miners that were stuck down in the mine in Tasmania. Now, I'm trying to remember their names. Brant Webb and Todd Russell, that's right. They're actually interviewed and featured on this video. It's very interesting. And anyone remember Tony Bullymore, who was lost at sea a number of years ago? They're all interviewed on this video. It's a very interesting look at the idea of people who get lost. But that'd be a really interesting series if you're interested in just viewing something like that. Feel free to come along. You're more than welcome to come along. And there's no charge or anything. Just come along at 7 p.m. on April the 13th. But I want to... sorry.
Is
Yes.
that $10 each time or a one-off?
No, just a one-off. It's just for the materials for the entire series. So, yeah, it's only $10 for just the materials for that entire series. But as I said, if people can't afford that, we're more than happy to work something out as well and get those materials to people who can't afford it. But I really want to thank you for coming along tonight and coming along for the last 3 nights especially, and just hearing these presentations. And I hope that you've gained maybe something from it, and that maybe you've started a journey into a bit of a larger world, one that might bring a lot of joy and satisfaction into your life.